Hi there, welcome to the Alpha Wave Trader week ahead. Just thought I'd recap a few key markets around the world for you because there has been some interesting moves. We've got the States hitting a new all-time high, and I guess we are really at that point now. Are we going to blast off to new all-time highs on the back of worldwide central banks shifting policy to a far more easier stance on the back of softer growth expectations? Or was the buying leading into the quad witching hour at the end of last week hot air, which needs to be let out of the market, and we should get that indication pretty quickly. So I'm just going to recap what I said last week and show you why waiting for the buy and sell pivots is so important, and then I'll have a look at gold and oil as well. And so just starting off, you'll remember last week we were sitting up in the sell zone of this wave down from the highs. So this is a daily chart on the E-mini S&P 500 futures. And you can see from the moves that we've had that there's been no sell pivot as yet, all the way through here. So we had a buy pivot that came in after we had the shift in policy stance from the Fed that said, oh, we might be looking at lowering rates. And so you had the false break of the 200-day moving average there. And we had the daily buy pivot, which is the close above the high of that lowest price candle. And since then, on the daily chart, there hasn't been a daily sell pivot. So you're just running with that, allowing it to play out. And so from here, early in the week, if the buying leading into the expiry is proven to be hot air, I mean, this is a pretty perfect spot to have another little false break of the high here. A lot of the shorts have been taken out of their positions. I mean, this is what the market does so well. We've got this initial wave down. A lot of people, possibly the bears, getting a bit excited as it broke the 200-day moving average. Now, those positions have all been taken out by a very sharp rally on the back of the Fed's change of stance. And the expiries have happened. In the States, I was saying I wanted to see how far it would run into that expiry. So here we are now, but with a new all-time high. But we can have yet another little false break of the high, and it could easily, rapidly turn back down if that buying was just hot air leading into expiry of those options. So I'm watching it like a hawk early in the week to see how it plays out around here. And this is where I say you need to wait for those pivots. You can see on this rally leading up to the last sell-off, we got that highest price candle there, and then the low of that candle is here. We had the daily sell pivot occurred there. Then we had some price action that occurred after it, trying to rally, and that's where I can find opportunities. And then the market did rapidly turn down. So you had to wait for that sell pivot, because I mean you need one before the market could turn down at all. So why not wait for them? So with the market as it is now, if it is going to just bust out, we won't get a daily sell pivot here potentially, and this market could really take off. And that's the thing I'm open to. I don't really have a strong view either way right here now because of the shift in policy from Mario Draghi's speech last week, and the Fed now looking to lower rates. So potentially the market could get really excited by that, and here we are at this multi-year high level and all-time highs. So there is the chance that it could bust out and really go for it. And if it does, who knows how far it could go, or how big the rally could be. I mean, it could be a multi-month rally. I'm a little skeptical that's going to happen, but who knows what the future holds. You've just got to observe what happens and go with it. So it's a pretty interesting week, I think, to see what happens here. Potentially, I think the favourite is that shorts have been taken out of their positions, longs are excited, and I think the thing that will confuse or rattle the market the most would be if we turn down again rapidly. So waiting for the sell pivot. If it doesn't happen, it doesn't happen. And you could wait for the weekly sell pivot if you wanted to be more conservative. So if we looked at the weekly chart quickly, you can see on this weekly chart, we had that huge rally to the upside. This is from the start of the year. And we got the weekly buy pivot there with the close above the high of that lowest price candle. And that weekly rally went all the way to the high. Then we had this weekly sell pivot there. And the retest of the midpoint of that weekly sell pivot candle, an interesting point. And then we had a bit of a sell-off, but then the reversal from the Fed, and boom, off we go again. And we've had a weekly buy pivot last week. So for the more conservative, it now needs to close below last week's low. And if it does, I can tell you it'll be a pretty vicious candle. If we turn straight back down and bust below last week's low, this market could all of a sudden, at the end of the week, be a lot lower. So it's going to be an interesting week's trading. And the low from last week was 28.84 and a half. So, you know, I actually wouldn't be surprised to see the market even dump quite rapidly if that buying at the end of last week was hot air, and there's a bit of a buying vacuum now beneath the market, and we are testing those all-time highs. Things can come off quite rapidly. So, yeah, the more conservative trader would be waiting for that weekly sell pivot before they'd get too excited. And from there, you'd get the opportunity to enter after that weekly pivot, because you'd always have a bit of a rally after that's occurred before turning down. And ultimately, my target is that midpoint of this whole wave higher at 2650. So even if the market is going to ultimately break out and have a huge rally, we could still have a balancing up period back to that midpoint over the next few months. So an interesting week ahead, I think, in the States. On gold, obviously everyone's talking about it now because it's busting out of a multi-year range, which is pretty interesting. You'll notice that on this whole rally higher from 2000 to 2012, the sell-off that we saw over that couple of years actually only came back to the midpoint of that whole rally. So the midpoint of the 10-year rally was pretty much the low that we got to here. So still in a bull market, really. And we've had this very long period with prices stuck around 1200 to 1400. And there is a chance that this is now really going to get going. There isn't too much resistance up here. Once it gets going, it could be a nice strong trend heading back to the upside. And the targets I'd have are based on this initial wave reaction in the downtrend. So if you're actually following the structure of this downtrend, that wave reaction, calculations off that, you can see it initially bounced off the buy zone there. So it had a 75% retracement of the wave. We've then had what you'd expect, which is a lot of work done, lots of resistance around the sell zone, so that upper blue section, and a lot of times revisiting the midpoint. So that's what you often see. You can see many times here selling off back there, resistance up in that sell zone, resistance up in the sell zone, back to the midpoint. And so if this is, a breakout and we're in a continuation phase, well, this initial move should get to the 25% level above that range pretty easily. That's 1457. So it could be a pretty quick trip to 1457, but there would be a bit of risk there. If the selling is still around, there could be resistance at that 1457. We might even see a false break, and it could look like it's selling off again before heading back higher. So my initial target on this move would be to that 1457, and ultimately can be heading to 1578, which is the level 618, the Fibonacci level above this initial wave. So really, I do think we are ultimately heading there, but it's always a bit of an arduous path. So you do expect it to have a bit of work done. It could take months to get there. But now that we have, busted out above that range, and this large uptrend looks like it might be getting going again, the buying that could come in and the length of the period that we've had in this consolidation phase means that the impulsiveness of this move could be quite surprising to the upside. So I think things looking pretty good for gold. So if we move on to oil, this is our WTI crude, and this is a weekly chart. You can see this big wave down that we saw in late 2019. Most of the price action that we've seen since is pretty much based off that. If you've been watching my videos for a while, you remember I showed you the weekly sell pivot that occurred there, close to the sell zone of the wave. So we've got this wave here. The sell zone is that 75 to 87.5% retracement. The buy zone being the 12.5 to 25%. They're the two key zones. And you'll see prices nearly getting to that sell zone, having the weekly sell pivot. And that's when I said I expected prices to possibly retest the buy zone. And I gave targets to $53 at the time when this weekly sell pivot came in. And so we got that move, and when we were down there a few weeks ago, I said, look, we probably will see buying support come in around that buy zone, which we've seen. And now we've had actually a weekly buy pivot come in last week, and the point of control of that whole wave comes in there around $60. So it makes sense that we're having a move back towards that point of control, and what happens to prices from there will be the most interesting. So if prices turn back down rapidly from that point of control and do take out that low, watch out in a big picture way to oil prices really collapsing. And you really do need to wait, though, for the weekly sell pivot now. So really on oil, I'm much of a muchness, pretty much 50% bet either way here, because we're pretty much at the point of control now, and we've got a weekly buy pivot in place from the buy zone. So there'll be buying support coming in if we do sell off. In the short term, there should be buying support coming in around sort of 55 down to 52. I'd say there'd probably be good buying support if we had a quick move down there and prices could attempt to head higher. So you really do need to wait for the weekly sell pivot again before getting too bearish on oil. So really it's a wait and see attitude on oil to see whether the Iran problems are going to inspire a much bigger rally in the oil price. So that's it for today. Really it's a wait and see and going with the buy and sell pivots. Very interesting to see what happens in this S&P this week after the end of expiry, and that really should set the tone for our market going forward. And gold looking interesting for potentially a quite impulsive wave higher. And I'll come back with more next week.